Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this fireside chat on the worldview on India. If you look at what's happening in the India AI landscape, over the last several years, we've seen a significant growth in the India AI landscape, driven by a very vibrant startup ecosystem. We just gave awards to hackathon winners, somebody who's still in college. So we've got a very vibrant startup ecosystem. We've got great IT talent. And equally importantly, we've seen significant emphasis by state governments like Telangana in identifying AI as a critical growth driver. Some of the statistics clearly call out that over the next 2 to 3 years, AI is expected to contribute about 10% of India's GDP. So, as a nation, we are aspiring to get to 5 trillion economy, and AI could contribute about 500 billion of that. And if we move to a global context, today the world economy is about $110 trillion. According to some estimates, by 2030, about 17 trillion will be contributed by AI. But the catch is, the same estimates also assume or say that about 70% of that 17 trillion will go to US and China. And that's where, ladies and gentlemen, we have these two gentlemen on the stage with me who will talk about the opportunity that exists for India. 17 trillion in 2030 is a large number. So how can we as India capitalize on that opportunity and make sure that we get a lion's share of that incremental value, the incremental GDP that is going to get contributed by AI? So maybe I want to start with you, Eric. Given your role in the US Department of State and your experience, what are some of the mega trends in AI that you're seeing in the US? And how does US view India's evolving role in the AI landscape?
I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm from the U.S. Department of State, our foreign ministry. I cover critical and emerging technologies, which are so transformative, so disruptive, so important that our Department of State created this special office with the acknowledgement that we need to have a foreign policy for how it is that we're dealing with what is indeed a geopolitical implication. So when I received the invitation to visit Hyderabad for this event, I typically go to New Delhi. We're dealing with, of course, the Indian federal government, our counterparts. But I leapt at the opportunity to come to Hyderabad because I kept being told, you've got to go to Hyderabad. That's where the action is in tech. And I can tell you, I spent the last couple of days touring around a little bit. We went to T-Hub, we went to T-Works, and I just am blown away with what I've seen. And it's my understanding a lot of the buildings that we visited, had you been here 20 years ago, they didn't even exist. So I'm really in awe of the accomplishments, and a lot of credit, I think, goes to the policies of the Telangana government. To answer your question, Anjani, I don't know about mega trends, if this would qualify as a mega trend, but I can tell you, you asked about my own experience. I personally am seeing AI being harnessed is in the work that I'm doing, and I think it's probably typical of what a lot of the people here today and throughout the world are doing, where it's helping in doing the job that I already do. I'm talking mostly about text generation. The Department of State, which has not always been the most tech-savvy institution, has really leaned into using AI for our work. So it's enabling somebody like me, who has to do a lot of writing for my profession, as many of us do, to take what had been a blank page, and it's always that kind of difficult part of, where do I start writing this thing? And it gives you a great first draft. And what I've heard is 60-20. You spend 20% of your time getting the prompt right. It gives you 60%. It gives you a pretty good draft, and then the value add is the last 20%, I think, where you do the editing and the fine tuning. And then as far as your question about where we see India in terms of its evolution with AI, I mean, we couldn't be more, from the U.S. government's perspective, more positive and supportive in that partnership, which one need only look around Hyderabad and see all of the major U.S. tech companies and their presence here to understand the deep, deep ties between our two countries in terms of technology.
And Prashant, you spent a lot of your career in India and Asia Pacific. So, from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of the AI ecosystem in the other Asian countries? And are there any learnings for us as India? And how do they view us as an AI power?
Sure. So, if you look at the global AI landscape, there are two ecosystems that are pretty holistic, means across the value chain, whether it's chips or whether it's cloud or foundation models or applications and so on. One is the US ecosystem and other is the China ecosystem. And those ecosystems are fairly autonomous in certain ways. However, if you look at other countries, they realize that they cannot do everything and they cannot be great at everything. So they are going with a more focused approach. So if you look at South Korea, for instance, South Korea is trying to work on the AI space bottoms up because they realize that a lot of foundation models that are being developed in the West, a lot of thinking there is very top down. And because of that, once you apply it to the local, heterogeneous, diverse context, a lot of time is very low. And so they believe that they want to work on hypercontext, right? So that is I won't call it a niche, that's a space they have identified for themselves because they do not want to take on the big foundation models head on, the big firms head on, because they believe they can't, right? If you look at, for instance, Singapore and UAE, I mean, both of them have developed their foundation models, UAE, I mean, the Falcon and stuff like that. A lot of their focus on the space is in terms of government transformation and public access and so on. If you look at Malaysia, for instance, Malaysia has had historical strengths in semiconductors. So we just saw Intel in the last 2 years making billions of dollars of commitment there. You see now Microsoft having committed to data center upskilling and training to help. So if there are two spaces that they are focusing on, it's chips, and they want to be the neutral semiconductor hub of the world, not pro-US, but not pro-China, and data centers, right? Chips and data centers. That's how Malaysia is looking at it. So that brings me to India. As to where should India focus? I think the question goes back to where India's current strengths lie that we can build upon, and that leverage allows us a better chance to win, right? We have lots of people, which means we generate humongous amount of data, whether it's UPI, whether it's retail and e-commerce space, whether it's our telcos. That's the kind of data asset that very few countries in the world have. And a lot of that data is very high quality data, very scalable, and very friendly to AI applications, right? The number two asset is the massive IT workforce. By 2027, India will have the world's largest IT workforce. That is a huge asset. The third strength, I would say, if you look at currently the big four areas where a lot of applications are gaining momentum, somebody put it as 4C. So there is coding, there is content, there is customer service, and then there is Copilot. And if you think about our GCC/IT/BPO industries, the export-facing industries, a lot of their work actually comes from these 4C areas. So we have humongous amount of data, we have humongous amount of IT workforce, and we have tons of global work we are doing here, which relates to exact spaces where there is tremendous momentum. I think India has everything going for it to give it among the top countries for AI status. Unfortunately, that is not today's reality. Because if you look at global rankings, various, depending on which ranking you look at, we are at number 14, sometimes number 10, or sometimes number 16. So we have got a long way to go, but I think we are placed extremely well if we bring our ambitions to it. Thank you.
So, Prashant, I think that's a very good articulation of the segments of the AI stack starting from hardware to deployment of the hardware via cloud to LLM models to AI services and AI products. And what you're also saying is for each of these elements of the AI stack, there are certain skills needed, there are certain leverage needed, there are land, labor, capital needed, and each of the countries in Asia Pacific, you're seeing them play to their strengths. So, Eric, just coming back to you on that, if I take that argument forward, one of the large strengths of India is both the tech workforce, and according to a report we recently published, we will have about 1.2 million people trained in AI in the next 2 years. So that's a large strength for India. How should India leverage that strength, and how does somebody like US look at India from that perspective?
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with Prashant's points about those strengths. Not only the vast talent pool has tremendous advantages that India has, and I would say is already harnessing. In terms of from my perspective, from the, representing the U.S. government, partnering with that workforce in a variety at three different levels, really. At the top, from a government to government level, we are engaging with our Indian partners through institutions like the Indo-US Science and Technology Forum, which facilitates academic exchanges and provides grant funding for technological entrepreneurship to identify talent on both sides. At the academic level, I mean, I need not tell anybody in this room about the number of students that go to the United States. Indeed, I know that in 2023, it was roughly 205,000 Indians that were studying in the United States, the most of any country in the world. And I learned this morning something to the tune of 40% of them come from right here in Telangana. And then at a third level, between private industry, of course, there's a tremendous flow of mobility, the workforce back and forth. I'm sorry, Anjani, what was the second part of the question?
In terms of how does the US perceive the talent, both for solving problems in India as well as India solving problems for the rest of the world?
Oh, yeah, okay. I think on that question, I would point to an example that I learned of in a conversation I was having with a contact of mine at Google, which an example I'm sure everybody here is familiar with, this Bashini app that provides for, as I understand it, real-time language
translation across multiple languages.
For me, that's a tremendous example of harnessing all of this data and for a societal good. Again, I think a very wise policy, well executed on the part of the Indian government. And those are examples of I think where India is on the right track and is already harnessing its vast pool of talent.
One of the things we've been hearing both yesterday and today, Prashant, with the growing prevalence of AI, questions around bias, around governance, and around safety are becoming very prevalent. So what strategies do you see globally are organizations and governments using to solve for that? And how can India become a leader in that? Because if we can do that well, clearly set the standards, that will be a huge achievement. And to your point that India has to leapfrog, this can be a great way to do that.
So first thing is regulation itself. I think the California draft bill, SB 1047, came out. Before that, a few months back, you had the EU AI bill, which I felt was very well thought through. I mean, still 2 years to go before it will be implemented. But I think a very serious set of proposals have been floated around there. And I see somewhere between the two becoming the norm for rest of the world outside of China. All right. So clearly, the first imperative for India would be to join the conversation into a government to government and maybe some industry thrown in relationship. Maybe India should champion the setting up of a World Intelligence Organization, a WIO, given that AI is going to so fundamentally transform the world that we live in. I mean, you spoke about $70 trillion out of the global economy coming from there. Yeah. So a World Intelligence Organization championed by India, but bringing all the key players into that fold is definitely one way India can try to enable an ecosystem and bring some decisive guardrails into that. The second part is, and certainly I have to bring you down to the grassroots. The truth is that all the content labeling and tagging and, if you want to eliminate bias, human feedback is one very good way to do it. But there is no very simple way to do it. You just got to have lakhs and lakhs of people sitting there tagging it and saying what's good, what's not good, what's right, what's wrong, and so on and so forth. That is a lot of jobs there waiting to be harnessed if we play it right. So if you talk about India's role in addressing the issue of bias, maybe that is one, right? I mean, some of the fundamental fine-tuning technologies like reinforcement learning on human feedback actually depends on humans to train AI at a mass level instead of a few coders sitting there in Silicon Valley and telling the model what to do, right? The third thing I would say, one issue of bias is ethical and legal bias, but then there is I think, an even softer and subtler issue of cultural bias. That AI can become a force for brute homogeneity in terms of culture, and that in order to ensure a heterogeneous foundation model, for instance, a heterogeneous output applications, which contextualizes outputs to local hyperculture, I think India can stand for a hyperculture layer. India can build a hyperculture layer. If you look at India with all the insane diversity we are a microcosm of the world, right? I mean, we have 9 darshanas which talk about different ways of thinking. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's exactly what AI model builders are looking for, which is new learning theories and new ways of how humans really look at answering different questions, right? So I believe that India, should champion World Intelligence Organization, should incentivize jobs per dollar basis, give incentives to create jobs at the bottom end of the pyramid in AI ecosystem. And third thing is, to set the cultural biases right, India should create a hyperculture layer. And I think all the translation work that some companies are doing are fantastic towards that. A lot more can be done. A lot more needs to be done. I think the government needs to function as almost an industry CEO in this respect, bringing all the players together into one collaborative ecosystem.
And Prashant, your point of lakhs of jobs being created at the bottom where we are doing tagging and some of the foundational work takes me back to the late 90s when, because of the Y2K issue or the threat, there were lakhs and lakhs of jobs were created. And that laid the foundation for the IT services industry, which is 250 billion plus today. So probably something like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Eric, one of the things that India's approach to AI distinguishes itself from rest of the world is because of our focus on inclusivity, affordability, and social impact. And that's just the nature of what we are as a country. So how do you see elements like this being incorporated when rest of the world looks at integrating AI into society?
Yeah, it's a very important question. And I would say that India's approach to AI is an example of our like-mindedness with the U.S. approach to AI. We share common values in terms of democracy, human rights, and innovation, with a mindfulness that innovation needs to be promoted while mitigating risks. And so, to your question about how this is shaping influence around the world, I would give you the example again from a U.S. diplomatic perspective of a recent event that we point to as a great success for setting global norms. In March of this year, the United States tabled in New York at the United Nations a resolution for safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. And this was to established a global consensus around the need for guardrails for how we achieve an AI for good, where the benefits are shared for all of humanity. And we ended up getting that resolution adopted by consensus with 123 countries. And I want to point to this because this is an example of where India is such a vital, consequential partner of the United States. Because, candidly speaking, when the United States tabled a resolution in the UN, there were a lot of countries who were a bit skeptical about what it is that the objective was. But once our Western friends signed on early on, but soon thereafter, so did our partner India. And once India did, basically the whole rest of the world followed, which underscores the importance of India's position as the voice of the global South, which we are fully supportive of. And we see such an important role for India in setting the right norms around the world as its rightful position as the greatest influence for the rest of the world.
Thanks. And I think before I let you two gentlemen go, I do want to run a rapid fire round with you. So just think about the first thing that comes to your mind. Don't think. So maybe I'll start with you, Prashant. What's the most unusual use case of Gen AI that you've seen?
Okay, so at the cost of sounding narcissist, there is this POC that my team developed a few months back, where it was AI for afterlife. So let's say as a loved one in your around you passed away, but you have a lot of voice samples of that person. You have a lot of emails. You have a lot of letters. You have photos, videos. How do you use those to recreate a virtual shrine where you could actually speak to your grandfather when you are feeling down and out? Maybe he can read the letters that he wrote in his voice by using voice cloning and by simulating the tone and manner. And actually, technologically, it's not difficult anymore. It was AI for afterlife. How do you recreate memory by bringing back our loved ones in virtual form? Not to the extent as you see in the Black Mirror, but not to the creepy extent, but still in a believable space. Yeah.
So more present, Eric. Which movie, book, or TV show do you think has the most realistic portrayal of AI? And I'm not talking the Terminator series here.
Okay. I'm going to say HAL 9000. For those of you who know the reference, the 2001 A Space Odyssey, of course, was this HAL 9000 was this very prescient, because I think the movie came out in like 1968, and it was what became this malevolent computer, but it was artificial intelligence. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's really phenomenal.
So one last question, Prashant, and the same question to both of you. Which is your most favorite AI app on your phone today?
The most frequently used would be Midjourney. But if you asked me the app that impressed me the most, I used it at one point of time just to test what's behind it. It's Eva.ai. It's a dating app. You date a virtual person, and the whole emotional simulation of how a girl behaves or a boy behaves, and she even kept diaries and stuff like that. I thought it was really impressive. And mind you, it wasn't the technology that was impressive. It was the human experience that was impressive. And I always say that humans are the true magic in AI. We often forget that part. Even when we are trying to do AI transformation in organization, we forget that human AI teaming, how that teaming dynamics will work, how will that teaming psychology work, is often a very overlooked area. And that is why a lot of AI pilots do not produce the results that we train them for. So yes, it's the human experience. Humans are the true magic in Gen AI.
Eric, last word to you. Which is your favorite app on your phone? AI app.
Yeah, I would say, okay, so I've got this one, it's called Picture This. And what it is an app where you point it at a plant. I could point it at any one of these flowers here, and it immediately identifies, I think there are several like this. It immediately identifies whatever flower or tree or plant or shrub, anywhere. It does so instantaneously. And not only that, you can use it for like my house plants when the leaves turn brown, and you point it and take a picture and tell you, oh, you're overwatering it, or it needs more sunlight or something. It'll help you to better care for your house plants, which I know is kind of a mundane example, but I think that's an example of like the power of AI. I mean, we didn't have anything like that as recently as 5 years ago, you know?
Thanks so much, Prashant. Thanks, Eric, for your time. I just want to close by one of the statements that Jensen Huang made. You know, India's IT will be the front office of world's AI revolution. So clearly, given by what we heard from both of you in terms of the opportunity in front of us as India, then as states, as Telangana, clearly there's a large opportunity. You know, 2030, we are looking at 17 trillion or more. And it's up to us to make the most of our competencies, of our advantages, and capitalize on that. Again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, audience, for yours.
Thanks so much.
To stay informed about the startup ecosystem, subscribe to My Startup TV.